Well, Javonne, thank you for joining us this evening. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce Javonne, who background started in 2018 when she joined the ACLU of Delaware, advocating for a lot of communities impacted by unfair criminal justice policies. She has an extensive background in providing clinical counseling for a number of social challenges that affect people, including such things as child abuse, violence, trauma, and criminal justice issues. She currently serves as a board member and trustee of the Delaware Alliance Group for Sexual Violence. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce her. I think we're going to speak for about 25 to 30 minutes and then leave room for questions for everyone. So with that, Javonne, welcome, and you can begin.
All right, just had to unmute myself. Hi there, everyone. My name is Javonne Rich. I am the policy advocate at the ACLU of Delaware. I would like to thank your group, Westminster Presbyterian Church, Lynn, Mike, and Sue for inviting me to speak and also helping to navigate the technology tonight. So as Mike stated, I'll be speaking for about 25 to 30 minutes. So you might see me take a break to drink some water. And this evening, I will share with you the work of the ACLU of Delaware's Campaign for Smart Justice and take a deeper look at reimagining our probation system. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. Okay, so I can't see what you're seeing, I don't think, but if you can see the slideshow and slideshow format, if you could give me a thumbs up, that would be great. Awesome, thank you so much. So as I stated, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the work of the ACLU of ACLU's Smart Justice Delaware campaign. Okay. To begin, I'd like to give some background context to probation and why we are taking a closer look at that system. And so we're taking a closer look at that system because probation is closely linked to mass incarceration. But what is mass incarceration? Stately put, mass incarceration is the United States having less than 5% of the world's population, but accounting for almost a quarter of the world's prison population. As a state, as a nation, mass incarceration is present. But as a state, we do not fare much better. Delaware imprisons at a rate higher than the national average, and our very small state incarcerates at a rate higher than our neighboring and larger states, including New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, and Maryland. In fact, Delaware incarcerates at a rate that is 59% higher than New York. So how did we end up here? We ended up here due to tough on crime policies, including the war on drugs, militarization of police, mandatory minimums, consecutive sentences, the elimination of parole, which resulted in a lack of early release options, the lack of alternatives to prison, which resulted in an overuse of prisons. And we also ended up here due to a probation system that is intended to be less punitive than incarceration, but in reality, it is a deferred or extended prison term. We must also acknowledge racism in the criminal justice system. Black Delawareans are 23% of the state's population, but account for 60% of our prison population. Black Delawareans face discrimination at every stage of the criminal justice process due to racism and bias. This results in Delawareans being policed more and receiving harsher charges and lengthier sentences. And the probation system is not immune to this disparity. where Black Delawareans make up 43% of the probation population. In 2018, Delaware's Campaign for Smart Justice was birthed uniquely with the goals to cut the prison population in half and to eliminate racial disparities in the criminal justice system over a period of 3 to 5 years. We use different tactics to make these changes possible, to continue moving the needle forward. And some of those tactics include public education, so hosting community events and using social media to spread awareness of the Campaign for Smart Justice, legislative advocacy, so advocating at Legislative Hall in Dover, storytelling to legislators, petitions, and this work would not be possible without community organizing. So building coalitions that support this effort, including organizations, people who are impacted by the system, and other allies. So what changes have we seen so far? Since the inception, we advocated for and saw historic changes. In 2018, we mobilized around the Attorney General's race by polling candidates and pushing the conversation to smart on crime alternatives, and it worked. The new AG proposed new guidelines to prosecutors to enact changes in charging policies and sentencing requests that impact the incarceration rate directly. We advocated for and saw the passage of legislation that made way for sentences to be run concurrently instead of consecutively, legislative changes that created adult expungement opportunities for most misdemeanors and felonies. And prior to the passage of this bill, there were no options for adult expungement for any conviction on a person's record. So this really gives people a real opportunity for a second chance. In addition to reforming sentencing laws and expanding expungement, laws were put in place to also eliminate geographic sentencing enhancements that contribute to racial disparities, address professional licensing limitations, and reducing the criminalization and punishment of juveniles. And even though this was a momentous occasion, the law was passed, but we still need to continue monitoring and still need to advocate to make sure that the laws are working the way that we want them to. And all of these accomplishments may fit on one slide, but they took a lot of work and a lot of power. Power, again, that was harnessed from community members, people impacted by these failed criminal justice policies, and it also took boldness from leaders to operate in a new way. In 2019, the Campaign for Smart Justice launched efforts to understand probation as a driver of mass incarceration in Delaware. Much focus on criminal justice reform had been around prison reform, not recognizing that most people under correctional control are actually on probation or under some type of community supervision. And what we found was that as of 2019, roughly 10% of the level 5, also known as the prison population, and 47% of the level 4, which is a lower risk population, were being held due to a probation violation. That year alone, in 2019, almost 11,200 new individuals were placed on probation. In addition, Delaware has the 8th highest rate among states for probation. What we knew going into this was that just over 70% of people released from prison would be rearrested within 3 years of their release. But what we did not know was what the impact of violations of probation were on recidivism, as well as our incarceration rates. And a study by the Statistical Analysis Center, or I might refer to it as the SAC, a study by the SAC analyzed a cohort of just over 1,200 people released from prison between 2013 and 2015. And they found that just over half of those rearrested were arrested solely because they violated a condition of their probation. Okay, 1 second. And that same SAC report mentioned previously showed that 94% of those arrested for probation violations were arrested for violating a condition of their probation, not for committing a new crime. Often people on probation are not incarcerated for committing a new offense, but for violating what is called a technical component of their probation, such as missing curfew, missing a meeting with a probation officer, and failing a drug screen, but not a new crime. And again, here you see that statistic where it shows that most people arrested for probation violations are arrested for crimeless conditions. So they're not new crimes. And in 2015, 1 out of every 3 persons released from prison were rearrested within 3 years for a technical probation violation. Some may say, what's the big deal? Why can't people just follow the rules? Then they won't be incarcerated. But for folks returning home after incarceration, the hurdles to successful reentry are substantial. Returning citizens struggle to find housing, transportation, medical care, and employment at a livable wage. On top of this, many face mental health and substance abuse challenges. The probation system and its reporting requirements, meetings, costs for treatment, curfews, and surveillance are insurmountable hurdles for too many. For example, those who are under the most strict level or more strict level of community supervision are subjected to 13 universal probation conditions. So people on this level, no matter why you're on probation, you have to abide by the same conditions. And those conditions include not committing a new crime or motor vehicle offense, reporting any arrest or simple contact with police to your probation officer. You have to report to probation at scheduled times. Sometimes it could be multiple times a week. And you have to allow probation to enter your home and your workplace, pay fees. You cannot leave the state without permission. And sometimes there are conditions added by the courts or the probation officer that at this time with my research, I don't even know, the range of what those additional conditions could be that would account for a violation. On top of that, the way that we police people on probation in the communities does not help. So Operation Safe Streets and Governor's Task Force is a program that was birthed in 1997 in response to gun violence. It's an invasive policing practice that allows police officers and probation officers to jointly police those on probation. The Operation Safe Streets and Governor's Task Force teams, they monitor curfew compliance by going to people's homes late at night and visiting public spaces to seek out people on probation. While otherwise unconstitutional, probation officers may conduct warrantless searches of people on probation, their homes and their cars. And while police officers do not have these powers, they gain immediate access to a person's home as a result of this partnership. And in 2018, Operation Safe Streets arrested just over 1,500 people, and 56% of those arrested were of people who are not even on probation. And so this demonstrates that the program is used to monitor not only those on probation, but their communities and families as well. The effect of this program is simply harassment and over-policing, especially of Black and Brown communities. So in July of this year, we, Campaign for Smart Justice, ACLU of Delaware, released a report on the probation system. And this includes the current state of the probation system, how we got here, and how do we advance forward. It also includes stories of people who are impacted by these systems and policies. This report can be found at peoplenotprobation.com. And in that report, again, we shared the information that I just shared with you previously, as well as real life experiences by those with lived experiences of being on probation and under correctional control. One of those stories and real life experiences shared in the report is of Trey Miller's experience. So Trey Miller was arrested and charged with burglary and robbery in 2012 and was released to probation in 2014 after serving 2.5 years. And so he was arrested when he was around the age of 19. Once he was released, coupled with his addiction struggles, Trey also struggled with the pain of the death of his young daughter. Despite this, he had a job, he helped care for his grandparents, and was beginning a new career. However, while on probation, Trey Miller had periods where he struggled to comply with substance abuse treatment, as well as meeting with his probation officer. Trey Miller never committed any new crimes while he was on probation, but he is now currently serving 8 years in a Delaware prison for his technical violation of probation, which those technical violations were of the failing urine drug screens and failing to meet with his probation officer as scheduled. And he was sentenced to 8 years in prison, despite the probation officer recommending only 1 year of incarceration for the technical violations. So even when Trey is released from prison, he will have to serve 6 months at a level 4 facility, followed by 6 more months of probation at level 3. All in all, he will be in prison until 2026, scheduled to be in prison until 2026. Think about that. By 2026, Trey Miller will have been incarcerated for 10.5 years for a crime that the judge originally felt only required 2.5 years of incarceration. And that extension of incarceration was for crimeless conditions. So he went back for things that were not even new crimes. So that's a really good example of why we need to make a change. By reforming the probation system, Delaware could not only cut its incarcerated population, but also reduce crime and recidivism, enable better victim restoration through payment of restitution. So for example, some folks end up losing employment because they are sent back to incarceration. Changing this system could enhance public safety by focusing resources on those most likely to reoffend. It could aid in effective rehabilitation and also free up millions of dollars for reinvestment. If Delaware cut the number of violations of probations by 60% and reduced the average length of time a person must serve for a violation, it would reduce the prison population by just under 1,100 people and save the state $37 million by 2025. Now that's cost savings that could be used to enhance reentry programs. It could better our substance abuse treatment programs and trauma treatment programs that are within the facilities for those who are public safety risks, but it could also enhance programs in the community for people who are not public safety risks, but would benefit from those services. A reimagined probation system includes the following pragmatic policy reforms for leaders to make, and that could be the courts, it could include the governors, and it can also include legislators, all the way to the Department of Corrections. So some of these changes, state agencies can choose to make these changes on their own internally without changing the law. But of course, changing the law is one way to make sure that that does happen. So just to go through some of these suggested policy reforms. The first would be to eliminate probation sentences for minor convictions by using out-of-court diversion, restorative justice programs, and alternative sentencing for minor crimes, and other policing programs that result in people not entering the legal system. In effect, judges can reduce probation officer caseloads, and that would allow them to better monitor those who actually present a safety risk. People should not be incarcerated for technical violations. We should only use prison or jail as a last resort to protect public safety. Other alternatives like community-based graduated sanctions should be tried and documented before any individual is incarcerated for anything other than committing a new criminal offense. And again, probation terms should be customized to meet the individual needs, because assigning the same 13 conditions to each person on probation doesn't make Delaware safer, and it makes probation more challenging for people. What we know is that when people violate conditions of probation, it could simply be because they were surveilled for a very long time. So the longer you are on probation, the more likely you are to have a mess that results in you being incarcerated. Like the prison system, the probation system disproportionately impacts Black people in Delaware, but we need better data to understand the drivers of the racial disparities that are evident in the system and to find solutions. And I just jumped through a couple of them, but if you go to peoplenotprobation.com, you will be able to see these recommendations fleshed out a little bit more. But another policy, a more urgent policy, I would say, is to end Operation Safe Streets and Governor's Task Force. The program not only creates a culture of probation that's focused on law enforcement and not rehabilitation, but the effects of this program is harassment and over-policing of communities of color. So it really doesn't harbor this culture of rehabilitation when probation and police are being used to surveil not just people on probation, but their family and friends. Now, these policies that are written here, they're not revolutionary and they're not soft on crime. In fact, other places have some of these recommendations in place. So New York City, for example, they used early discharge and minimally intrusive supervision for low-risk clients. And they decreased the probation population by 69% over the past 2 decades, while also reducing the crime rate by 57% in the same period. So some of the reforms that New York City made included shifting 2/3 of the probation population from in-person reporting check-ins to monthly check-ins at electronic kiosks. They shortened the lengths of probation terms. They increasingly granted early discharges from probation. The city also reduced its probation department budget and staff, while also increasing the amount of money that they spend on each person on probation for rehabilitation, as well as expanding contracts with community-based organizations. So this can be done. Now, the pandemic has taught us something too. COVID-19 temporarily changed the way people in the community and on probation are policed. The Department of Correction reported that they did stop incarcerating people for technical violations during the COVID-19 outbreak. This means that as of June, fewer people were being sent to prison for technical probation violations. The incarcerated population dropped by roughly 900 people from between February and August 2020. Some of this reduction can be attributed to the Department of Corrections' new policy of not incarcerating people for technical violations, but there are a number of factors that could contribute to that as well. Also, the number of people on probation declined sharply during this time. Between February and August, the probation population decreased by just under 1,950 people. And I don't know, we as an agency don't know the cause of this decline, and it could be for a number of changes and a combination of factors. But some of this could be due to reduced crime. It could be changed policing methods that cause fewer people to be charged with a crime. For example, some police departments opted to not do as much proactive policing and only engaging in proactive policing if it was a public safety risk. Some police agencies switched more to a reactive method where they responded to calls if it was an emergency, but if it was a non-emergency, they would take that call over the phone. Other factors that may have contributed to this reduction of people on probation include judges being aware of the impact of the person who's charged and the system of placing another person on probation during COVID-19, or even the Department of Corrections could have made the determination that additional monitoring was no longer necessary. So this way of thinking and changing how we police people in the community and on probation was forced upon the justice system, where they had to reconsider who should be in the criminal legal system and who should be out. And that was only because this public health crisis was seen as a matter of life and death, right? So our prisons and correctional facilities are incubators of illnesses and viruses. But we should remember that lives are always on the line, even when we're not in a pandemic. The most telling part about these changes during the pandemic is that we learned that leaders can change the probation system, and they can do it very quickly. And how can you take action today on, some of these changes to enhance the probation system? Well, today you can sign our petition at peoplenotprobation.com to ask Delaware officials to make changes made in response to COVID-19 permanent, as well as making additional changes to the probation system that will enhance it for people that are impacted by it. It's also important that we all get involved. Every facet of mass incarceration impacts every person, whether it's a neighbor, family member, coworker, whether it's not having enough money to fund education systems or funding better programs for people who are incarcerated. It impacts everyone. And so these issues affect the entire community. So some other ways to get involved include attending or volunteering for Campaign for Smart Justice events and programs, talking to your friends, family, and networks about the Campaign for Smart Justice, calling, writing, tweeting, Facebooking your legislators to support reform positive bills, and also visiting votesmartjusticede.org. And so if you have voted by mail already, this might not relate to you, but you can share it with other folks who have not quite voted yet. This election season, we polled candidates on their thoughts about different policing and probation reforms. So by going to votesmartjustice.de.org, you can see where your candidate stands on these issues and vote for candidates that are for smart criminal justice reform and changes. So thank you for your dedication to hear about this very important issue. It is 7:30 at night. So I can imagine that this is an issue that's also important for you to learn about, to hear, and to also engage in. And with that, I will take the opportunity to answer some questions or do as I'm told by.
Yeah, Javonne, thank you very much for your presentation. It was very enlightening, and we appreciate you staying for questions.